Here is a question someone submitted. I know I need to be in the Word and praying, but I am in such a dark place. I'm filled with sadness. How do I find hope again? You know, depression is an interesting concept for medical professionals, and it's certainly something I cannot answer in a short segment here on the podcast. And most depression cases need intense counseling. But I would like to lay out a few general principles for you that might help you to understand exactly what's going on in someone who is depressed. The first case of depression that we know of in the scriptures takes place in Genesis chapter 4. Cain and Abel are offering sacrifices to God. Cain was offering what he thought was the best of his labors, and Abel was doing the same, but they had a different heart. Abel's sacrifice was being offered with one spirit that honored God, and Cain's sacrifice was being offered in a way where God wasn't honored. So Cain became jealous. In fact, Cain became what we would call today depressed. I know that because God asks Cain some questions. He asked him in Genesis chapter 4, he says, "Why is your face fallen? If you do well, will not your countenance rise?" Cain was in a position of anger. He was angry and upset that his sacrifice had not been accepted. He was angry at his brother, and he was angry at life. But God asked him a very pointed question. He says, "Why are you angry? Why are you depressed? If you do well, will not this depression lift?" Well, we know what happens. Cain kills his brother Abel, and the rest is biblical history. But it's an interesting question to pose to someone who is battling depression. If you make the right choices, will not your countenance rise? We have choices that we make every single day of our lives. We decide whether or not we're going to get up out of bed. We decide whether or not we're going to take a shower or eat breakfast or go to work. We make hundreds and hundreds of choices every single day. But for depressed people, even the simplest of choices is very difficult for them to make. Sometimes for depressed people, there is an organically based reason for it. Now, we know from science that there is a material in our brains that transmits neurons. It's called synapse. From one neuron to another, reactions that take place in your body, thousands of them every single day, every single second, are transmitted through this material called synapse. But for some reason, some people stop producing this material. And medications help to reproduce that material in the brain. Now, those cases are very rare, but nonetheless, they do exist. There is an organic basis for depression. But in most cases, it is not. In most cases, it's because we make the wrong choices every single day. Now, there is a prescription that I have used for years to help people battle depression, and it's not easy. I say that up front because it takes work. It takes effort on your part. And the same question that God asked Cain, I ask you. If it's worth it, if you are able to overcome this depression by making right choices, are you willing to put the effort into it that's necessary? The first thing you have to do is move. If you're sitting, you need to stand. If you're standing, you need to walk. If you're walking, you need to run. If you're running, you need to keep running. In other words, you need to have motion that's forward. I am talking physical and mental motion forward. You need to make the choice not to just sit there. You have to get up and make something happen. And then once you are in motion, you need to have certain goals, certain expectations. I would suggest that you look at all of the choices that you have to make in that given day, from the hardest to the easiest, and look at that easiest decision you have to make and make that decision. Gain a victory over the the least difficult decision that you have to make that day. It might mean just getting up out of bed. That's the easiest thing you can do, is move and get up out of bed. Once you gain a victory there, then the next step and the next step and the next step, and on. As the day progresses, you are making decisions to keep that movement forward. Now, I think it's also very important that you have someone to whom you are accountable. Someone you can go to when you don't feel like moving anymore. Some angel of accountability. Even Jesus needed that. When Satan tempted Jesus in the wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights, at the end of that, Jesus was exhausted, so exhausted, that the Bible tells us that angels came and ministered to him. Now, there are certainly people in your life who want to minister to you and pull you out of that doldrum and help you to achieve victories. And there are times when you're not going to feel like doing that. And I suggest to you, that's when you get on the phone. That's when you call that person who's committed themselves to be that angel of accountability to you and say to them, pray for me. Help me to make the next decision that I need to make. Help me to move forward. And then when Jesus was tempted and the angels came and ministered to him, the Bible then tells us that he went out and began to preach the gospel. Now, to me, that's the next step in the process, and probably the most difficult, is find someone who you can minister the gospel to, someone you can encourage, someone you can give a good word to. So you're moving in a direction that is positive as you're making decisions day in and day out, the easiest to the hardest. You're appealing to someone who is your angel of accountability to help you when you get stuck. And then you move towards someone else who has a greater need than you do. As you minister to them, you begin to find that the burden begins to lift, just like it would have happened with Cain had he listened. Instead, he made the choice to go and kill his brother. So when you think about this progression, it's not an easy progression. It's not a simple progression. It's difficult to make the easiest choice first, and then the second easiest and the hardest, and all the way through till you're moving in a general way that gives you victory over each day of your life. So you're moving one step ahead, one step forward, right foot in front of left. I remember for one lady, a pastor's wife, she couldn't even get out of bed. I remember going over to her home and actually taking her by the hand, helping her out of the bed, helping her move toward the bathroom to go and take a shower. Her husband and I each took a hand and we just moved her in that direction. She was so functionally depressed. But after coming out of that shower, she had a little bit of a smile on her face, a little bit of a beam, because that was something she never expected when she got up that morning she would be able to do. Now, each day we built on that. We continued to build on that until eventually she emerged out of the darkness that was her depression. Friends, that is not a simple cure, but it is a progression of steps you can take to achieve a victory God wants you to have. Most certainly, as he looks to you, as he looked to Cain and says, if you do well, will not your countenance rise? That's a question I think you need to answer.